Hello everyone, and welcome back to my read-through of the books in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist. I'm G, and we are going through the Rotunda of Kings. And we have made it through 6 of the books in here. And we have 20 left. There's so many. There's just so many. But anyways, let's get started. King Me'erta. King Me'erta took the throne in 1779 at the young age of 31. There were multiple leaders, many of them from the church, who publicly feared that the appointment of Me'erta would cause great damage to the already fragile religious culture. Their fears appeared to have been justified, as Me'erta's reign was a turbulent one. In fact, it was often stated that it was his mother Jolatha who ruled the throne for most of Me'erta's 236 years in power. Me'erta himself had no time to rule Dni. He was much too busy, too focused on satisfying the women who ruled him. From the journals of the prophetess Alashe. In 1817, Me'erta proposed construction of the Temple of the Tree, marking the first time any king officially supported anything other than the original beliefs of Rinaref. Just as important, Me'erta suggested that the line of the Great Zero, which had been chosen by Rinaref, was inaccurate. Precedent existed for such a claim. On previous ages, the line of the Great Zero could either point from the Great Zero itself towards Magnetic North, as Rinaref had chosen, or towards another prominent landmark, as Me'erta suggested it should have been. However, he did not officially change the line. He most likely realized such a change would have carried far too many implications upon the society concerning construction, navigation, etc. His goals, or Jolatha's, in such a remark, were simply to question the beliefs of Rinaref and encourage the cults to build in a newer section of the city. His remarks were all that were needed. The temple was rebuilt, with strong opposition from some, in 1843. A few years later, Me'erta sanctioned the construction of the Temple of Water and the Temple of the Sacred Stone. Both were finished in 1876 and 1902, respectively. All were built on Me'erta's recommended line of the Great Zero. As the years passed, cults sprang up everywhere, wreaking havoc on the religious beliefs that Dni had once had. The Temple of Yava was empty, and its priests and prophets were small in number, as many had left to pursue other beliefs. In 1976, Me'erta attempted to change the rules and restrictions of the Riders' Guild, including altering their oath. He claimed his proposals would leave them more flexible in their writings and allowed the Dni to do more. However, the proposal was met with staunch resistance from Grandmaster Tremal, who adamantly opposed the king, and as the records show, refused to change the oath that Ailish had written. As it turns out, the refusal cost Tremal his life. Many say on order from Jolatha. Years later, many viewed Tremal's refusal as one of the most heroic deeds of Dni history. Grandmaster Temas of the Guild of Riders in a speech to the Five Lords in 7034. If those rules and oaths had changed, many believed, as Tremal had, the path to Terranea would not have been long behind. And that is why we exist, wrote Tremal. Once Tremal was found dead, the Riders' Guild as a whole refused to change the proposed changes in the oath and regulations in support of their fallen comrade. Eventually, Jolatha, through Me'erta, gave up trying. By far, Jolatha's most destructive action came the year of her death. In 1999, she convinced her son to break the seal on the tomb of the Great King. Why she wished for such an action is not clear, although numerous possibilities were proposed years later. Though few in number, there were still some who believed the Great King would return, and Jolatha was infuriated at any power the Great King had. She possibly wanted to prove once and for all that he was dead, an impostor, and fool. Others wrote that she was interested in gaining access to some of the ancient books, as the tree believed they held special power. Still others said she was simply mad, while others claimed she was possessed and an agent of Jakuth. Jakuth was the equivalent of the devil in the Dni religion. Regardless, the seal was broken. The act was carried out in secret, in the dead of night, as even those who opposed the Great King would have found such an action blasphemous and dangerous. A number of books were taken from the tomb and placed in the Temple of the Tree, along with what Jolatha claimed was a piece of robe from the body of the dead king. Jolatha died 2 days later from an unknown illness, while the books she had taken out remained in the Temple of the Tree. Me'erta quietly ordered the tomb sealed again, and much stronger. It was said that Me'erta believed his mother had been cursed for entering the grave, and he himself was petrified of it, or any mention of the Great King in the later years of his life. Me'erta, known as an unfaithful man, died 15 years later with one of his lovers. Guild of Healers records indicated massive poisoning as the cause of his death. He was 267. His murderer was never discovered, although there were numerous suspects. Though he had many enemies, most agreed it was either his wife, for obvious reasons, or son, who despised his father's weakness and lack of judgment. Ironically, it was that son, his oldest, whom he left the throne to. King Gan took the throne in 2015 at the age of 144. Though he was not necessarily convinced of the greatness of the Great King, or Yavo for that matter, Gan was far from the despot his father was. Unfortunately, he was never quite given the chance to do much for his people, as the sins of his grandmother consumed his reign in the throne. 6 months after Gan's coronation, the first signs of the plague began to show themselves. The plague ended up killing over a quarter of the Denis population and cutting birth rates in half until its cure was found in 2262. Eventually, the healers would discover that the plague was an evolved version of the disease that Alcindor had created to destroy the Pento. The evolved version cut Denis lifespans in half and caused massive infertility. For the elderly and the young, death usually came quickly in the form of heart failure. The appearance of the plague, and the eventual announcement that it was similar to what the Great King had created, caused the public to cast most of their blame for the illness on the Great King. Very few people knew of Jalatha's request to open the tomb. Those who knew of the breaking of the seal seem to have not spoken of it, or possibly were not heard if they did. Numerous records indicate that as far as the public was concerned, the plague was the Great King's fault. Somewhat surprisingly, because of the infertility rates, Gan managed to have a son in 2050. He died 20 years later at the age of 199 after being in the throne for only 55 years, the shortest of any king. Gan left his son a population that was slowly dying, both physically and emotionally, and there was no cure in sight. King Benasharan took the throne in 2070 at the age of 20, a record that was never surpassed. He was extremely young to inherit the throne, and his short reign displayed his immaturity. It was said that there was never any control or leadership from the throne while Benasharan sat in it. As a result, the people were forced to look elsewhere for some kind of trust or hope. Most turned to religion, leading to many more factions and cults. Many claimed healing powers either from nature, special leaders, or Yavo himself, through a variety of different means. It seems clear that Benasharan wavered in his stance on just about everything, including religion. In some speeches he begged Yavo for healing, while in others he sought for help from the tree. In the meantime, he was of no help to the healers or chemists, both of which were working hard to find a cure. In fact, some of Benasharan's speeches point to public condemnation of the guilds, accusing them of shallow efforts and failing their own people. Those who held faith that any cure existed outside of miracles and or special potions were few and far in between. The population continued to die, and the amount of children born decreased tremendously. Benasharan himself died in 2193 at the young age of 143 without any descendants to leave the throne to. In fact, so few children were being born that Benasharan had trouble choosing an heir, even from his own staff. It was often customary to choose the child of a staff member if a king did not wish to choose or could not any of his own blood. As a result, he chose his 179-year-old uncle to take the throne after his death. It was later said that some higher power must have been involved in such a choice, as Benasharan was far too ignorant to choose an heir that made so much sense. Taken from the writings of Grandmaster Ishem of the Guild of Legislators. King Hemelin took the throne in 2193 at the age of 179. Hemelin had been a guildmaster in the Guild of Healers, and it was said he took the throne with rage in his heart and fire in his mouth. From The Healing of Denis, written by Manassa in 2294. He was extremely angered over public opinion of his guild and made it his mission to make sure that a cure was found. Some say he exhibited more power and authority in the throne in 1 week than his nephew had in 123 years. Hemelin was fairly convinced that a cure lay in the books of old, and he had been encouraging the healers to look there long before his coronation as king. However, his nephew had been hesitant to allow access to the books, something that immediately changed once Hemelin had authority to look through them. Hemelin seems to be a fairly devout follower of Yavo and often claimed that only Yavo would heal them, not the other gods that his people were seeking. In 2255, Hemelin became extremely ill, and most thought he was about to die. The Guild of Healers continued to try and prevent death, but their prognosis was very grave. It was during his days in the sickbed that he met a woman named Lallan. She helped to care for him, and as time passed, Hemelin found himself living just to see her one more time, as he wrote later. Lallan must have felt the same way. The new love seemed to forge a new will to live. Hemelin recovered, and to the day he died, praised Lallan for the reason he was able to defeat the plague. Though others did live through the illness, healer records indicated a 95% fatality rate once the disease reached its later stages. 2 years later, Lallan helped the rest of the Denis defeat the plague. Rumors say that while searching through her old histories that her relationship afforded her access to, she found hints as to where more of the old books had been kept. It was a few months later that the Book of Bireni, a popular book that Hemelin had always sought, was found. 6 years after the discovery, the Guild of Healers, led by Guildmaster Jason, considered the plague cured. A drink was developed that prevented the body from contracting the illness even when directly exposed. Records point to tremendous celebration like had never been seen before. From The Healing of Denis, written by Manassa in 2294. A newfound optimism spread throughout the culture, and unofficially the Denis Renaissance began. It should also be noted that on this day in 2262, King Hamelin and Lalin wed in grand ceremony. As a result, the day became a day often chosen for marriage in later years. In 2270, the first post-plague child was born, and Hamelin promised to give him the throne as a symbolic gesture of hope and celebration. Though Hamelin tried to use the end of the plague as a tool to encourage his people back to Yavo, it did not seem to succeed. Instead, there seemed to be a newfound love of the culture itself, of the arts, of technology, and of further exploration into the truths of the universe. In 2350, the Minor Guild of Miners, following the encouragement of Hamelin, announced their plans for drastic improvement in mining methods and technologies. Hamelin left an upbeat but rather dazed culture to his successor when he passed away at the age of 342 in 2356. Taken from the Journal of King Hamelin, written directly before his death in 2356. King Hinash. Hinash took the throne in 2533 at the age of 66. Hinash's first major accomplishment was the ordering of the construction of the new Guild of Miners facility. The construction marked the first use of extrusion in construction and work, begun in 2577 and finished in 2580, marked a much faster and more efficient means of building. Hinash had been a member of the Guild of Stonemasons before his coronation. As such, records point to him being extremely interested in the mining and the construction technologies that were being pursued. As well, Hinash was one of the strongest proponents for expansion within the cave systems. Though Hinash's push for expansions was not met with much enthusiasm at the time, it set the foundation for great expansion that would occur under the reign of his son Nidra, with the sculptor Lachir leading the charge. Hinash was apparently also very interested in pursuing better relationships with other cultures, often pushing for further interactions and increased trade. He not only opened up the rules on trade, but also pushed the cultural rules concerning relationships with those of non-Tani blood. There had been strict regulations up to that point concerning imported goods and travel between ages. Up to that point, no one, most of all a king, dared to marry an outsider. In 2709, 5 years after the death of his first wife, who died giving birth to his fourth son, Hinash married a woman of non-Tani blood. The fact that the marriage was met with little opposition was a sign in itself of the relaxing attitude of the people towards the outsiders. The effect of such actions upon the culture was grand. Foreign materials were used much more in construction as well as clothing and jewelry, and foreign music and art influence began to show itself in the Tani art of the day. It was apparently with some thankfulness that Hinash's second wife did not bear him a son. Though the culture had relaxed, it is rather clear that the public did not want to even have to deal with the possibility of non-Tani blood in the throne. In fact, one author went so far as to say, even had they bore a child, it would have been made for a very uneasy public to have such a being living within the palace, perhaps taking the public's acceptance too far. From How They Came, a detailed look at what started the Mi-Dis War, by Jamin, written in 7201. Hinash died in 2779 at the age of 312, leaving his fourth son to rule. King Nidra took the throne in 2779 at the age of 75. Nidra had been a member of the Minor Guild of Sculptors at the same time as the great sculptor Lachir, and as a result, the two were excellent friends. As Nidra took the throne, Lachir, who was 4 years younger, was starting to be recognized. Those who had seen his work were already claiming him as one of the greatest artists Tani had ever seen, even though most had never even heard his name. From The Man from Jatairi by Kemal, written in 3243. Nidra had always been a proud supporter of cave expansion, and once he gained the throne, made it his mission to make sure that his people felt the same way. Nidra's 3 older brothers were very close to him, and in fact took the role of his closest advisors. Each was a guildmaster, the oldest with the Guild of Miners, the second with the Guild of Stonemasons, and the third with the Minor Guild of Architects. Because of their positions, each ended up having a great effect on the accomplishments of Nidra. Most of the evidence supports the fact that it was not Nidra's persuasive speeches or the motivational abilities alone that pushed the expansions, but also the fantastic skill and talent of Lachir. He only needed one chance to prove his skill to the public, and Nidra gave him that opportunity in 2807 with a design for a monument to the discovery of the Book of Bereni. After that, Lachir, along with Nidra and his brother, presented a plan for a new residential district. From that point forward, it seems as though expansion could not have been stopped even if someone had tried. Throughout the 221 years of Nidra's reign, 4 new districts were begun, including the residential Jerin, the elite of the elite districts Kale, the business district of Kali, and the industrial district, managing importation and manufacturing of foreign goods, Ner Eril district. In 2916, the Guild of Mechanists announced industrial extrusion, allowing for further improvements in construction methods, including unistructural buildings. Instead of the joining of blocks that had been used up to that point, unistructural construction allowed for the weaving of different stone, almost like a sweater, as one historian described it, making it appear as a single seamless piece of stone. Nidra passed away in the year 3000 at the age of 296. He had 2 daughters, but no sons of his own to give the throne. Instead, he chose the oldest son of his brother to succeed. King Rekheri took the throne in 3000 at the age of 81. In the same year of Rekheri's coronation ceremony, a man by the name of Tevar was born. Beginning in 3077, many say he defined Rekheri's reign more than Rekheri himself. From Yafo's voice, written by Adesh in 3143. Tevar was an ardent follower of the great king and spent his entire growing up studying the king's teachings and words. By the time he was 65, he was apparently appalled at the state of his people, especially pertaining to religious matters. Though he began on a small scale, in a matter of years, Tevar became one of the most influential men in Dini history. He was a powerful leader, a gifted speaker, and a tremendous motivator, and by 3077, a well-known name. It was 3077 that Tevar publicly denounced the sect and his people, including the government's lack of faith in the principles and laws of Yavo that they were founded upon. He often pointed to the council chamber and other government structures that now covered the tomb of the great king as a symbol of what the hearts and souls of Dini had become. "There is no longer time for religion as government and power have stolen our love," he stated numerous times. Most of the public seemed to agree with Tevar, especially considering the tomb of the great king and its covering. They believed they should never have allowed it to happen. Although not remembered as a great event in itself, most historians agreed that credit which should be given to Rekheri's reaction to the teachings of Tevar. Rekheri at first was infuriated at Tevar's speeches and his apparent disapproval of the culture. In return, he denounced Tevar and his teachings and even threatened to have him imprisoned. In 3081, Rekheri supposedly attended one of Tevar's speeches in an effort to ridicule it and give the other side to the public. Instead, he ended up in a public debate with Tevar. According to witnesses, it was a debate that Tevar clearly won. Many witnesses' testimonies of the event are chronicled in Yavo's voice. Though Tevar handled the debate with the king as best he could, at times his words were rather harsh, words to which the king had no response, and ended up bringing quite a bit of ridicule upon himself, instead of Tevar. However, instead of ordering Tevar's death, which he probably could have done, he returned to his palace and thought about what he had heard. According to the prophetess Shama, Rekheri was greatly affected by the words. He refused to speak to anyone for 2 days following the debate. 5 days later, Rekheri personally invited Tevar to the palace, and later that same day announced that he had chosen Tevar as his main prophet, and asked forgiveness from his people for the wrongs, not only of himself, but of kings before him. Though women usually took the roles of prophets, the choice that Tevar was one that no one argued. Shama herself was said to be thrilled that Tevar's wisdom was being sought. Those who personally witnessed the speech of King Rekheri left the event transformed, from Yavo's voice written by Edish in 3143. It was not long until their personal transformation began to change the entire culture. By 3100, 600 years after government records showed 2,500 registered sects, there were 47 sects in existence. Only 10 of these sects' membership was greater than 500. The public seemed to return again to the beliefs their culture had been founded upon, those that Rinaref had taught and the great king had expanded upon. The people were again unified, and much work was done to join the classes of rich and poor that by that time had already begun to separate. There was major renovation of deteriorating districts, mostly poor, and construction of a new theater company and concert hall in the Bellari district, which had been one of the poorer districts in the entire city. In 3112, Rekheri announced with Tevar by his side plans for grand renovations, an almost complete reconstruction of the Great Temple. Rekheri also announced that the old line of the Great Zero was accurate and should be honored again. The temple itself was to take advantage of handheld extruder technology that had been developed in 3092. As well, the great artist Fali was to paint the inside of the temple, considered by most to be the greatest artist of the Dini Renaissance. As it turned out, it was Fali's final masterpiece as he passed away in 3123, 6 months after the completion of the temple. For the remaining years of Rekheri's reign, expansion continued both outside and inside the cavern. New mining technology was seemingly announced annually, bringing with it great prestige to the relatively newly formed Major Guild of Miners. Tevar passed away at the young age of 218 in 3218. Rekheri was so greatly disturbed at his passing that he ordered 5 days of national sadness. There were minor protests from a few of the still remaining sects who obviously did not follow the order, but for the most part, Dini mourned with Rekheri over the loss of the prophet. Rekheri died a year after Tevar at the age of 300, leaving the throne to his firstborn son, Tejara. King Tejara took the throne in 3219 at the age of 114. Though his father was considered to be an extremely decent and honorable man, especially in his later years, Tejara did not follow in those footsteps. It said that he was an intelligent man, but that he used that intelligence and cleverness for his own personal gain throughout his life. Excerpted from Grandmaster Gerens of the Guild of Riders' private journal. In fact, rumors say that Tajara succeeded rather well at convincing his own father that he was the perfect choice for the throne, when most believed that one of his two younger brothers would have done much more for his people than he ever did. If there was one thing that seemed to direct Tajara's reign, it was personal gain. He was known as a masterful pretender long after his death, while those who saw through his lies during his reign were few and far between. From The Lost Son, written by the prophetess Hailesi in 3422. Due to Tajara's nature, there is not much good that can be said about his time in the throne. The palace underwent a major renovation in 3271, and in 3279 the Writers' Guild presented Tajara with The King's Age, one of the most beautiful and amazing ages that had been written up to that point. Grandmaster Gerens' private journal. It was later discovered that Tajara had ordered the age written by two writers who eventually died of mysterious illnesses after their work was done. Tajara was married officially to one woman, although there were many rumors of multiple other companions. As it turned out, Tajara was also known within his inner circle to be an extremely jealous man, especially of his wife and the other women in his life. In 3285, Tajara's oldest brother was imprisoned for the creation of illicit ages, a crime he vehemently denied to the time of his imprisonment. Tajara expressed great sorrow at the sentencing, although it was later learned well after Tajara's death that the crime had been set up as punishment for what Tajara had perceived as a lustful looks from his brother. In 3298, a guildmaster from the Guild of Miners was killed in a freak accident while inspecting the progress of new tunnels. Again, it was later learned that Tajara had ordered the man killed due to a relationship he had had many years earlier with one of Tajara's lovers, long before Tajara had met her. Though Tajara's reign was viewed as fairly repulsive by most, it is important to note that for the first time in their history, the people of D'ni remained strong and focused even under the leadership of a poor king. The words and teachings of Tevar stayed in their hearts, and they focused on their personal lives, and if they were pleasing to Yavo, more than their king. From the lasting impact written by the grandson of Tevar, Elim, in 3576. If there is anything good to be said of Tajara, it is that he did not destroy the fragile condition of his people. Religion was not important to him, and thus, though he never did anything to encourage his people one way or another, he did nothing to prevent those who wished to believe a certain way from doing so. Tajara died in 3422 at the age of 317 and left the throne to his third son. Though Tajara claimed the boy was born of his wife, there were quite a few rumors that the boy was actually the first son of one of Tajara's younger maidens. The rumor was never proven either way, as both his wife and the maiden passed away 2 years after the boy was born. Though officially Tajara had 3 sons, it's possible that he actually fathered 12 sons and 7 daughters, an exorbitant number for D'ni. It should be noted that most of these facts were not public information until long after Tajara's death. For the most part, the D'ni honestly believed that Tajara had been a decent king. Though some began to judge the reign of Tajara by his son, it was not until much later when truths were revealed that the public's opinion of Tajara truly changed. King TML took the throne in 3422 at the young age of 39. Like his father, TML's major concern was personal pleasure. Unlike his father, he seemed to be not nearly as clever at hiding his true intentions from his people. In spite of TML's inability to lead, a few worthwhile historic events were carried out during his reign. First was the construction of Stone Eater in 3469. Though TML really had nothing to do with the Guild of Miners' first colossal tunneling machine, he claimed quite a bit of the credit at its christening. Grandmaster Naaman of the Guild of Miners, who did spearhead the effort, was irate at the lack of mention of his own name during the speech and made his thoughts public in the days that followed. Like his father, TML carried out relations with quite a few different women, besides his wife Shama, whom he married in 3477. Unlike his father, it was said of TML that these women, including his wife, much more easily persuaded him. Public opinion clearly believed that Shama was a rather incredible woman. Why she stayed with him through his entire life, even through his well-publicized affairs, was not as clear. Some said she used TML and the marriage for her benefit, as she definitely had his ear, written by the prophetess Athsheba in private journals. Others said it was because she was a faithful follower of Yavo and believed that the promise she had made to him was not meant to be broken. From Shama, written by Lalen in 3890. Regardless, it seems clear that Shama was an intelligent woman who, though it was never stated publicly, for all practical purposes held the throne from 3477 on. In 3500, women became eligible for minor guild education. Though there had been women participation in the minor guilds before that point, actresses, etc., there had never been officially recognized as a member of their own guilds. Though there was a push to allow women to join the major guilds as well as the minor, Shama herself gave a strong case not to allow such an event to happen in 3523. Shama's words were spoken to the council as they debated whether or not to allow women into the major guilds. She strongly disagreed with women being in governmental positions, a seemingly ironic view as she was basically a king of Dini at the time of her speech. Regardless, she argued that women had much more important duties, including the guiding of children. The push for such allowances seemed to fade away in the years following her speech. In 3574, Shama gave birth to TML's first son, at least that the public knew of. For the remaining years of TML's reign, Shama focused on the raising of her son, whom she vowed would not be the same kind of man as his father. A daughter was born 30 years later, and Shama raised her with equal resolve. Again, though the people were not led well, they remained strong in their beliefs and purposes, somewhat ignoring the bad leadership of TML and instead focusing on the high example of his wife. From The Lasting Impact, written by the grandson of Tevar, Elam, in 3576. TML passed away from an unknown disease in 3654 at the age of 271, giving the throne to his firstborn son. King Kedri took the throne in 3654 at the age of 80. Kedri himself was seen by many as a testament to the type of woman his mother had been. The day of Kedri's coronation was the proudest moment of Shama's life, she often said, up until the day she passed away in 3689. Whether or not they agreed with Kedri's decisions, it seems most did, there was seemingly hardly a single Dini who did not greatly respect and care for Kedri. He was a king for the people, and most historians agree was the most popular king of Dini history, besides the Great King. Kedri led a number of small proposals that often benefited the lower classes. At the same time, it seems he assured the higher classes that the proposals were the right thing to do. Up to that point, the island has basically been set aside for the elite. It was Kedri who established the district of Shamathen, later changed to Karathen, as a more affordable residential district. Kedri also donated his own Age of the Kings, written during the reign of his grandfather, to the Common Library. He directed money to massive renovation projects throughout Dini, including further additions to the Great Temple, the Opera House, and further renovations to Bellari, the deteriorating district that Rekkari had started years earlier. In the numerous books and journals written about Kedri, it is said that he often walked the streets of Dini and attended events with the rest of his people as though he were one of them. He was married in 3686 at a public ceremony that was open to all who wished to attend. As one writer said of the event, if you did not want to be there, you did not want to be Dini. Kedri eventually passed away in 3908 at the age of 329, leaving the throne to his firstborn son. And I think that is a pretty good place to cut it. We have learned a lot more about the kings of Dini, and we continue to learn even more about them. And we are coming to the end of the books in Uru, which is really exciting because that means we're going on to another series soon. Not to say that I don't love Uru, I love Uru a lot. But anyways, thank you all so much for following my read-through of the books in Uru Ages Beyond Mist, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.